apart. Milton's back as a Category 5 hurricane this evening. There's an Air Force reconnaissance aircraft there right now, and we will be taking a look at what it is sending back information-wise, try to figure out what this is going to do tomorrow as it approaches the Florida coast for a landfall sometime tomorrow night. And while all this is going on, at least the weather around the rest of the country is actually quite nice for this time of year. So if you have to leave Florida, you've got 49 other states that you can go to find better weather. But nonetheless, we do have a serious hurricane situation here, and we're covering it tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. Not a shock. Uh, got down to what it got down to yesterday. 897 millibars. They were carrying winds on the advisory of 185 miles an hour. Um, then you had that eye wall replacement cycle that took it this morning. Pressure went back up to I think 932, and once that was done, now it's moving into the very warm loop current that exists in the Yucatan Peninsula. So what happens? It's strengthened again late this afternoon and this evening. So we're back down to on the advisory, Joe, a 905, and there's a recon there now that confirms that. They did it off a satellite estimate, then they got the recon here. I mean, you kind of expect that to happen with these things sometimes. They make, they get that first burst of strengthening, then they heat, then they weaken a little, then you get another burst of strengthening. But I think from here, we're now left with what's going to happen as far as the strength is concerned as it heads toward the Florida coast. I'm still high Cat 3, low Cat 4. Where it is category wise, I don't know that it really matters very much. We all know this is a dangerous hurricane at the end of the day, and it's gonna wreak havoc along the west coast of Florida.
I agree with you 100%. It is a bad situation. No, it will not make landfall as a 5 on the Florida Peninsula. That's the good news. The bad news is even a strong 3 or a low category 4 is going to do an incredible amount of damage to a region of Florida, part of which has already undergone tremendous damage from Helene, and will now see all of that accentuated or made even worse by the passage of this storm Milton over the next within the next 24 hours. It is a bad news situation, and Joe, I only hope that my concern is that there are people out there, and we see this all the time with all types of categories of hurricanes. People always saying, "Well, I've been through storms before, and I'm going to stick this one out." And I hope that if the emergency management person knocks on somebody's door in, let's say, Sarasota or Tampa or St. Petersburg or whatever, and says, "You've got to leave," I hope that those people inside leave. I guess it's up to them whether or not they leave or not. I remember one hurricane in particular, I forget the name, but some years ago, where somebody absolutely refused to leave. I was, "I'm staying here." And that's when the question came. The next question was, "Okay, can we have the name of your next of kin?"
Right,
Just in,
right.
and that somehow coerced or convinced that person that he had to leave. So
I got to
let's hope.
think after Helene. I mean, certainly after Helene, from 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, Um, a lot of the same places are getting impacted that got impacted from the storm surge of Helene are going to see it again. I got to think that if they didn't leave the first time, they're going to leave this time. If they left the first time, they've already left for the second time. So let's just hope and pray that everybody uses some common sense when it comes to these things. And let's also take a look at this is the enhanced satellite loop. I love these because I think they're, as dramatic as the visibles are, when you add the color to them. I mean, look at that eye. That is just incredible to me. Now, it's a little bigger than it was yesterday. It actually looks like it has contracted in the last couple of hours. it's got that circular buzzsaw look. A few interesting things going on. Joe, look at the to the northeast. There's this burst of I don't know what that breakaway band is that's developed, but there's a burst here in the darker enhancement that's halfway between the hurricane and the Florida coast. So that's kind of interesting with regards to what's going on in the upper atmosphere. I haven't quite figured that out yet. But the power of this is certainly evident here on the loop. I mean, it just stands out like a sore thumb.
It does. It does. And what you have to keep in mind is that even though that band is still well away, it's kind of like a renegade or break off from the actual storm, the actual hurricane. That looks like it has a fairly good amount of tropical moisture with it. So we may see, or some folks on the southwestern side of the peninsula of Florida may get some heavy duty rains before the actual event, main event coming their way later tomorrow and into tomorrow night.
I'm gonna see if I can roll this. Let me add a bunch of. I'm gonna take a chance here. I'm gonna go back 120 frames, which takes us to about 9 o'clock this morning. I'm sorry, 5 o'clock this morning. And you'll notice it's loading new frames, but while it's sitting here on the still shot, you can see the difference this morning with that eye wall replacement cycle going on, the uh, little bit more of a ragged look to it. I mean, it was still looking like an absolute powerhouse, but relative to where it was on the peak strength. But then you watch to see what happened. A couple of things to note during the day, all right, is the fact that there's some empty frames here, so that made that useless. Uh, I'm sorry, but you get the idea here. You go from this sort of ragged look early this morning and to the look that we have now, which is clearly uh, the look of a stronger storm from what it was earlier today. I mean, it just stands out there. And the other thing is that I noticed on some of the loops was that during the day there were these little wobbles going on where it kind of jogged a little bit east southeast for a few hours, then sort of went east or east northeast, and then came back east southeast. So this thing is so strong that it's just wobbling, and it is a little bit further south than some of the models had it at this time. Had it yesterday for this time tonight. So it's caused subtle shifts in the track. I would just caution though. I'd be really careful about reading too much into that. I mean, you get these wobbles, and sometimes they're meaningful, and sometimes they're not. So, if you're sitting and you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, it just wobbled to the south, so maybe I'm safe where I am. I wouldn't necessarily look at it and don't look at it in that context because that could easily wind up wobbling north in this really unstable environment. When you're dealing with so much energy and so much power, you are going to have these wobbles like this. And of course, the models, they were initialized, a certain way. So if it winds up moving further south, when they get initialized again on the next run, all the models are going to shift a little bit further to the south. But just be really careful of reading too. I'm just trying to be really cautious about reading too much here. And I'm noticing on I'd say the last couple of hours, it looks like it's moving, a little more. I mean, certainly now east northeast, and maybe a little bit like 050, let's say, 50 degrees. I mean, that's just, I'm sort of eyeballing this.
What's important to mention, Joe, about these wobbles is the situation relative to Tampa Bay. I mean, I've been hearing that depending upon exactly where the landfall is going to be, if it goes north of Tampa, it could be even worse than if it were to go over or just south. Would play a big role in the storm surge. So,
Well, north
and
of Tampa is a worst case scenario because then
right,
they'll have a southwest wind, which will just basically force the entire Gulf of Mexico into Tampa Bay. That's the worst case, that if it goes just north of Tampa Bay. Now, if the
right.
center goes into Tampa Bay, um, then I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad. I mean, it's certainly not a good thing with respect to the max winds because you're going to get into that core. if that's the case. So what you may not get, maybe you get a little bit less storm surge, but then you're going to be dealing with 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts. A track further south exposes places like Port Charlotte, Punta Gorda, Fort Myers, and a lot of these places have upped their storm surge forecast now because of this slight southward shift. So, what's a benefit for one spot, it could be a disaster for somebody else.
And the thing is that the you mentioned about the wobbling. I see a lot of these storm tracks, the projections from the Hurricane Center or from private forecasting services, and they have the storm moving pretty much along a straight line, and that really does not happen. You're absolutely right. There are slight wobbles, however slight they may be, maybe 10 or 15 miles further to the left or to the right or whatever. And in this particular case, even a minor wobble like that, as we just discussed, relative to the city of Tampa, plays a great deal of emphasis on just how much damage, just how much flooding is going to occur. So it really, I mean, we could say in a broad brush situation, the storm, yes, is heading more or less up toward the Tampa St. Pete area and will probably make landfall somewhere in that vicinity later tomorrow night. But precisely where that landfall is going to be is going to play a very important role as to just how much destruction or devastation is going to ultimately occur because of storm surge and winds and whatnot. So, but no matter which way you slice it, again, want to stress here, not going to be a 5 when it reaches the Florida coastline tomorrow night. It'll probably be more like a 4 or even a high strung 3, but that still is going to result in some major damage. And I'm thinking about places that are still waiting to get power back from Helene. And now with this on top of that, it may be many days, maybe weeks before some parts of Florida get their electricity back.
Helen Debowitz on the chat board says, "Is there, is there a chance this thing could move between Cuba and the Florida and South Florida and go through the Florida Straits?" And the answer to that is no. And the reason for that, if you look at the loop, uh, the clouds up in the central and northern Gulf are all moving to the northeast. And this is getting caught in that flow. Well, even the clouds that you see, these what there is of them in Cuba, and those are moving also to the northeast. So the upper flow is basically like that. And yeah, there's no chance that this is going to all of a sudden decide to just go straight east and go through the Florida Straits and miss Florida completely. That's just not going to happen. But again, you're dealing with here, such a dominant feature in the atmosphere. Here's the visible, and you can see the eye on the visible here. Now it goes to infrared after sunset, and there it is. Uh, yeah, look at you see the high clouds up there moving up into northern Florida. I mean, this is the flow and there's also a trough that's dropping down off the Texas coast that is eventually going to get involved with all of this. And yeah, you could make a case, Joe, that if it, when we were looking at the shear map yesterday, it Milton gets right into sort of the bottom part of that shear zone. But if it's a handful of miles further south, that could make a difference with regards to the weakening that you would anticipate with the shear. It could slow the pace of weakening down. And I think the Hurricane Center made a very valid point in their discussion tonight was the fact that this upper trough that's getting going to get involved with all of this is going to inject probably a little bit of what we call baroclinic energy, in other words, non-tropical energy, the way non-tropical systems intensify, and it won't make the system stronger, but it might slow the weakening down, the pace of weakening down. So that's something to consider. And yeah, if you follow the eye, you could see it was moving east, and now it's more east north, certainly more east northeast in the last several hours, and maybe even northeast, which is pretty much what models were indicating this to do, starting about now.
Will you be showing the spaghetti track for
Which,
this?
sir, hold on, and I will bring it up forthwith.
Because
and
what I was
I'll make it bigger.
there it is. And in regard to the question about when we'd go through the Florida Straits instead of going on the track that we've been talking about, there's your reason. Virtually every short-term model has that storm system going right across central Florida. I think the difference, the deviation between the northernmost and the southernmost track limit in central Florida could be on the order of maybe about 100 miles, not even 75 miles. I mean, that is a pretty tight consensus of where this storm is going to be going. So if you're thinking that all of a sudden the storm is going to take a sudden loop to the south, it ain't happening. It simply ain't. It would be great if it did, but maybe not so great if you lived in northern Cuba or in the Bahamas. But the track seems to be fairly set right now as to where it's going. Again, the only difference in terms of the city of Tampa is going to be whether or not it does go north of Tampa or over or just to the south, as to just how much of a storm surge and how much damage they're going to receive in the long run. But in essence, what we're looking at is a storm that's going to cut right across central Florida, like the proverbial buzzsaw, if you will. And Joe, I mentioned the other night that Andrew in 1992 tracked in the opposite direction. It was actually across Homestead and Miami, that area, but it went in the opposite direction. It went from east to west, whereas
Right.
this storm is going to track from west to east.
Yeah, Andrew even at one point I think was moving southwest or west southwest.
Yeah,
Um, and same with Katrina. I mean, Katrina started on on the east side of Florida and then kind of crossed over and moved southwestward, then turned west and northwest toward New Orleans. Which, by the way, has happened not just with Katrina, but Hurricane Betsy in 1965 did almost the same thing. Was out east of the Bahamas, came to a grinding halt, turned around and went southwestward, and crossed Florida, southern Florida, and then came out the other side, and then wound up going to New Orleans. So these unusual movements, west to east movements here in the month of October in the Gulf of Mexico are not uncommon. The deeper you get into October, when you look at late October hurricanes and November hurricanes, they usually move more west to east than east to west because we're getting to that time of year as we go into the autumn season here and get deeper into autumn. You have high level westerlies from Canada that drop farther and farther south with each passing week in general. And that creates more of a westerly flow in the Gulf rather than like you have in the summer months where it's ridging in the southeast and upper air steering winds off in the Gulf of Mexico are usually from east to west. And here's the intensity guidance, the latest intensity guidance. Now I'm trying to figure out that. So this is 18. It was 1 p. Was 18Z is 2 p.m. So we want to go out 36 hours, right? Yeah, 36 hours for 2 a.m. Thursday. What I'll do is I'm going to draw a line. Just a moment here. I'm going to make the line smaller. So this would be the intensity. Putting this purple line here so you can see where, if landfall is going to occur in the very early morning hours of Thursday, uh, you could see how the various models, you actually have three models that still have it as a Cat 5. Okay.
right.
So, they are not models that I'm familiar with. One is called the AEMI. The other one is the CEMI, and the blue one is the UKXI, the UKMet 11. So it must be some ensemble member of the UKMet that they use for that. But the vast majority, 3 and 4. I mean, you have a one, two, three of them at Category 4, and then a whole bunch of them are at Category 3, from as low as a minimal carrot 3 to a high grade 3. So I'm going to just kind of put it in again. I keep saying the high 3, low 4 at landfall, and that's kind of where I'm sticking with my forecast. And by the way, then once it's inland, you see it does weaken. Now it's going to take 12 hours. All right, so it's going to take about 12 hours to cross the state. So let's go to the 48 hours. So that would be the 48-hour position. So this will be the point where it comes out off the east coast of Florida. And you'll notice that the vast majority of those are in the one and even some two. I mean, they're spread out all over the place, but the big cluster is in the category one area. So it's going to be a hurricane all the way across. You're going to have part of the circulation in the Gulf of Mexico, part of the circulation in the Atlantic. Florida is not a mountainous terrain by any means. It's about as flat as you can get. And as a result, this will probably maintain hurricane strength, and it's not a lot of distance from one coast to the other. So it's going to maintain its strength as it moves from the west coast to the east coast. It's going to lose some strength. I'm sorry, but it's going to maintain hurricane strength all the way across. That's not good news for the places in the I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando,
Right.
because when Hurricane Charlie back I think 20 years ago, 2004, if I remember correctly, with Hurricane Charlie, that became a big a wind issue for the inland areas. There was a lot of damage to cars and windows in the Orlando area with Charlie as it moved across.
Yeah. 12 hours is a pretty good forward speed for a tropical system. So, and 12 hours, Mark G says it seems pretty slow to me, but actually, in terms of movement for a tropical system, that's pretty fast.
That's about 20 miles an hour.
And so to do what this is going to do, remember, it doesn't, once it makes landfall, it's not going to instantaneously drop from, let's say, a Cat 4 or Cat 3 down to a 1 or a tropical storm. It's going to take some time. And the faster that thing propagates or moves to the east, the shorter amount of time it's going to be over land, and it's also going to be probably when it's still at hurricane force. So, yeah, the people who live in Orlando, people have been talking about Tampa and Sarasota and Fort Myers and St. Pete and whatever like that. People on the other side of the peninsula, on the other side of Florida, the East Coast, they've got a lot of stuff to worry about too. In fact, I saw, Joe, that Universal in Orlando is closing as of 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So uh, I don't know what they're going to be doing at Disney World, but I certainly don't want to be in Disney World or Universal anytime later tomorrow, especially tomorrow night or especially on Thursday.
My nephew works at Disney World, so uh, Disney's been through this sort of stuff before. I'm gathering that they probably know what to do when it comes to these tropical storms. I'm waiting for the 8 o'clock advisory, which still has not. We are 7:59, and it still hasn't posted. So the 4 p.m. position was 22.7 and 87.5, moving east northeast at 9. At that point, it was 480 miles southwest of Tampa, or about 320 miles west southwest of the dry Tortugas. Okay. Oh, now we have it. Okay. So the new advisory is 23 north, 86.9 west. That's about 280 west southwest of the dry Tortugas, 440 miles southwest of Tampa. The center is 440 miles southwest of Tampa. Maximum sustained winds are 165 miles an hour. The boat movement they're carrying is east northeast or 70 degrees at 10 miles an hour. And the minimum central pressure 902 millibars, Joe, 26.64 inches.
Wow,
That's
that's
rare.
impressive.
That's impressive. Very rare indeed to see. All right, just really quick, I'm just going to run through this because there's no changes in the watches and warnings that they issued earlier, but just to summarize quickly, storm surge warning for the Florida West Coast, Flamingo to the Swanee River. That includes Charlotte Harbor and Tampa Bay. Sebastian Inlet, Florida to Altamaha Sound, Georgia. So that now we're on the east coast of Florida, where we have a storm surge warning, and that's because north of the hurricane track, you can see how they have it here on the map. North of that track, they're going to have an east wind, so that's going to bring in the Atlantic Ocean in at high tide. So that goes from Altamaha Sound, Georgia, and, Sebastian Inlet to Altaham. I said it already enough times. And that includes the St. Johns River. Hurricane warnings for the Florida West Coast, Bonita Beach to the Swanee River, including Tampa Bay, the Florida East Coast from St. Lucie and Martin counties, the Martin County line northward to Ponte Vedra Beach. Storm surge watch in effect north of Altamaha, South Georgia to Edisto Beach, South Carolina. Hurricane watch in effect for the dry Tortugas, Lake Okeechobee, the west coast from Okloksee to South Bonita Beach, Florida East Coast north of Ponte Verde Beach, Vedra Beach to the mouth of the St. Mary's River, and the Florida East Coast from St. Lucie, Martin County line to the Palm Beach, Martin County line. So you have that. And then you've got all sorts of tropical storm warnings on either side of those. So I think that pretty well covers it. Let's check out the Recon and see what we got. We've got two passes here. So they've got 902. So that this first pass was 902. The red line is the pressure. And I'm eyeballing it, by the way. The blue line is the wind. And when it makes that V shape, that they're inside the eye, which is where the wind drops from 100, almost 140 knots down to under 30 knots, and then just as soon as they drive into they cross to the other side of the eye wall, it zooms all the way back. It looked like it got to about 150 on this pass. On the second pass, which was an hour later, it looked like the red line's a little higher. It looks like more it's around 906, 907. Again, I'm just sort of I'm eyeballing it. The peak wind close to 160, 160 knots at flight level. The other thing that's impressive here on the chart underneath it is the flight level temperature and dew point. Look at when they get into the eye, Joe. It goes from about 15 degrees Celsius. So I'm figuring, what do they fly at about 1,000 feet?
Yeah,
1,500 feet. So
right.
the temperature was 15 degrees Celsius. It shoots all the way up to almost 27 Celsius when they're inside the eye. Talk about a warm core system.
Wow.
I mean, that's an impressive thing. That's pretty impressive to look at when you see that. How the atmosphere, which normally gets cooler from bottom to top in hurricanes, at least at the lower level, it's pretty much the other way around.
Absolutely true, Joe. Absolutely. And the interesting thing also is that I'm looking at these diagrams, and I can remember just like 20 or 30 years ago how we would have been like so impressed by this. I mean, now we take these diagrams and technology for granted, but I mean, it was so much more difficult, getting this data like 20, 30 years ago when they flew into a tropical system. And you remember talking about yesterday about some of the great storms, some of the great hurricanes with low barometric pressure readings, and it may actually be available on YouTube. I'm not sure. I have not had a chance to look, but if you go on YouTube, see if you can find Nova, the PBS show. Nova did a whole show about Hurricane Hunter aircraft flying into the eye of Gilbert, Hurricane Gilbert, which at that time, I think it was back in the 80s, had the all-time record low barometric pressure reading. Um, and I remember in that one show when they got the instructions that the Hurricane Center wanted them to fly straight in to the center of Gilbert. They're telling the pilot of that aircraft that, and the pilot was saying, "Okay, you know, uh, it, and
Have you ever seen those planes? Because
well, I know you went. They had them once over at what on Long Island.
yeah, at MacArthur Airport,
Yeah,
that was it was an educational experience because it's not like they have coach seats and carpeting and
no,
somebody
no.
serve. You sit on the floor. I saw that when I saw that I thought to myself, I never really wanted to go on one of these things during a hurricane, during a fly out to go into a storm. And after I saw the plane, I said, I think I made a good decision about not wanting to go. It's just not
And
my
just getting
thing.
off. just getting off the subject for just 1 second, for all of you who are baseball fans or whatever, the Mets have just defeated the Phillies 7-2, so they now lead in their best 3 of 5 series, 2 games to 1. So yay for the Mets.
I
That's
am going to.
probably that's probably also why our dear friend Dennis Cassia hasn't been on the chat board, because I know he's a rabid Met fan, but he may very well join us in the coming minutes or whatever. But anyway, that's something that's to put a smile on some of your faces if you're a Met fan, as opposed to all this tragedy and potential problematic situation with the hurricanes or whatever. So, but yeah, Judd, and you and I both have said more than a few times in the past that if we were ever offered a chance to go on one of those Hurricane Hunter flights, I don't think we would go. I
No,
certainly don't want to go.
no. Even when I was young, I really didn't even think about that sort of thing. But all right, I got one of the models that have really worked well with this have been these hurricane mesoscale models. This one is the HWRF. Okay. And given the fact that this storm, especially yesterday, was so small in terms of the geographic coverage of it, I mean, gales only went out like 50 miles or whatever, 50 or 60 miles or whatever the number was. Um, the global models have had a real tough time with the intensity. I mean, the global models have been off by 70 millibars as far as the intensity goes. These mesoscale models have worked a lot better. So we have this particular model, Joe, for tonight at 8 o'clock. It had a pressure of 919. All right, so it's about 15 millibars too high, but it's a whole lot better than what the globals had. So we'll just follow this along and this is one of those floater images where the storm stays in the center and the geography moves. So you can see the Florida coast now on the upper right. You can see where Tampa Bay is. So this is tomorrow night at this time, it's a 939 on the pressure. So it's still a Cat 4 here. And you notice that the look of it is different than it is now. I mean, now it's just sort of buzzsaw look. And we're going to see this gradual expansion of the wind and the rain field. So when we go through Wednesday, tomorrow night at this time, 939, still a fair distance from Tampa. And now we've got it. Now this model here, Joe, takes it north of Tampa. It's 946. So it's kind of like that borderline 3, 4, pressure here. But if you look at the isobars, look at the isobars, not only how tight they are, but this is the problem with the surge for Tampa Bay. And if a storm goes into the north, the winds are literally, all right, let me go back to the free one. Hold on. I got yeah, okay. And I'll make it a little wider. The winds going counterclockwise are coming in from the west and west southwest. All that water is being pushed into Tampa Bay.
Right.
It's also being pushed further in, down the coast, although not to the same degree. But this is why it's so important whether the storm goes just north of Tampa or just south of Tampa or right into Tampa Bay. Now, uh, on the north side, you're going to have, an east wind, a lot of rain, and you notice that there's quite a lot of rain that goes all the way back. This is the I-4 corridor here is going to be right in the heart of the heavy rain as it crosses the state. When it comes out the other side, so it's right on shore at 5 a.m. Thursday. This particular model is a little slower than the others. So this is 5 a.m. Thursday, and this is 5 p.m. So basically, it's a 12-hour trip across,
Right.
and all of that heavy rain is all through the I-4 corridor. And of course, now on the east side of Florida, you've got a minimal hurricane that's just moving offshore with strong easterly winds going into the northeast coast of Florida. So that brings storm surge, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, it goes on out to the east. Let's check out another one. Let's look at how about the HMON? Okay, the HMON. And the thing about the HMON model is that oftentimes this model, Joe, loves to make Category 5 hurricanes out of everything. So, I mean, so this morning, now this is from 18Z. This is the 18Z run. That's Wednesday. Okay, so let's go back. So right now, it has a 902. So that's what that's what the Hurricane Center says we have 902. By tomorrow morning, it's at 897. So the HMON says that this thing actually may deepen a bit more or intensify a bit more during the overnight. Now let's see what it does as we go through the day side. 899, 904, 912. So by 8 o'clock tomorrow night, you can see Tampa Bay on the upper right, 923. So it's still like a Cat 5. It's right just maybe just over the Cat 5 threshold at this stage based on the pressure. And now we got 11 p.m. It's 932, 939 at 2 a.m. And then it's in Tampa Bay as a 949. So the HMON has, pretty much has a 4.
100. Thank you. Well,
Yes,
it's really
And for
coming.
those of you who are watching the show for the first time, whenever we get to 100 likes, Joe rings the bell. We get to 200 likes, Joe gets to
Use the
ring
air
the bell.
horn.
Right. No. Then he gets to do the bell again. And then it crosses over, moves offshore, probably somewhere, I don't know, near, what is that, Melbourne, Daytona, you think?
Yeah, yeah, that looks like that.
Yeah. And then goes on out to the east. So the HMON model holds on to the strength longer than the others. And then we'll just look at one more. Let's look at the HAFS model. HAFS-A. Okay. And there's an A and a B. We'll look at the A. I don't know if there's any difference between the A or the B. For right now, it had a 928 and it's 90 902. By tomorrow morning, it's 926. By tomorrow evening, it's 958. And you can see Tampa Bay is just to the northeast of it. 3 a. So this one's actually a little faster, brings it ashore at around 11 p.m. And it looks like it's a 962 when it comes over. So this would be sort of you know, maybe a low to mid end Cat 3 with regards to strength. So, you got your choices here of depending on what model you look at. And by the way, this one goes just south of Tampa Bay. So, I mean, you have your choices here in terms of, you know, models, I guess what, maybe about a 50 to 60 mile range from north to south as far as where landfall is going to be. And we might as well look at this is a tight view of the GFS. And the GFS has it going into Tampa Bay at about a 965. But then again, if we look at the GFS right now, 0Z Wednesday, Joe, it says that the pressure is 966. So it's only off by what, 64 millibars? It's 64 millibars, not deep enough.
Well, you gotta give the models some credit. I mean, just unfortunately, these are not super duper fine grid models, and for something like this, such a tight storm like this, it's always going to be very difficult to pin down. But we'll see. When it's practically upon Tampa tomorrow at this hour, we'll probably have a more definitive idea as to where it's going to go, north, central, south, whatever.
I'm just for laughs because you know how the 3 kilometer dam also loves to bring pressures down to ridiculous numbers. I can't even
Oh,
read the
this is
numbers
probably
here.
this is probably going to be this. They'll probably bring it down to like 864.
Yeah. Um, let me get a let me get a little closer. Let's see if we get the southeast view here. I can't read it. Looks like a 922 This is at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, and it comes ashore. It takes it right over Tampa Bay. I can't. It looks like a 921. In fact, there's a 918 in there right before landfall. 918, 919, going into Tampa Bay. It kind of gets you a little scary as far as the weakening prospects are concerned, if only because of the fact that the global models have been so wrong. I mean, in terms of the pressure, and obviously it's because the global models, the grids are bigger. This being such a small system, relatively speaking, at least for now, that it's missing a lot of the big it's making these big pressure errors. The NAM 3 kilometer we love to use when it comes to severe weather and thunderstorms. So it does have me a little bit concerned that they may be onto something here. This is going to be a much stronger system than you might think by the time it approaches landfall. I'm not forecasting that necessarily. I'm just saying that to see the smaller models, the mesoscale models handle this much better than the global models. I think is a little bit of a cause of you have to kind of keep your eyes open that the weakening that is forecast may be slower to occur. Let's put it that way.
I just noticed something that they apparently. I don't. Let me just make one check here, and it might be worth even asking Levi Cowan why they are not using this anymore. Oh, wait a minute. I see now why. I see. That's the. I was. I'm looking at the NAM 3 kilometer, and what I was doing was I was going to precip moisture, and on the GFS, you can look at the 700 to 300 millibar level in terms of moisture, and you often can see not just the isobars, but also more clearly the uh, the central pressure of the low. And I've said, well, maybe it'll come up clear if I go that route on the 3 kilometer NAM, but they don't do that on the 3 kilometer NAM, obviously, or they don't have that available, the 700 to 300 millibar level for relative humidity. So there. But for what I see, Joe, I see the lowest pressure just literally a few hours before landfall on the 3 kilometer at 918.
It is 918. Yeah, I was having
Oh,
a
that,
tough time seeing it.
yeah,
Uh, that would not be good.
no, it would not.
All right. So, meanwhile, while all this is going on, we have, if we check, let's check the watches and warnings map. And you'll notice that the rest of the country is just in this meteorological snooze. There's nothing much of consequence going on. There's the fog advisory here, the red flag warning there, a couple of frost advisories in central Wisconsin and central Michigan, a couple of frost advisories up in northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, into southeast, then and into down east Maine, and even Alaska's quiet, and Hawaii. Uh, Not much going on in either state. So it's all concentrated in Florida. We've got hurricane warnings. We went through all of those. Obviously, flash flooding is going to be an issue. Now let's look at what the Storm Prediction Center has to say. And tonight, we have a marginal risk overnight in much of South Florida and Southwest Florida, mainly south of Tampa, southward down to the Keys. And this comes with a 2% tornado risk. Now, tomorrow into Thursday morning, this is the one that we thought we said yesterday would be the one to look at. Uh, Slight risk. The I-4 corridor is that northern edge of the slight risk line. The marginal risk goes a little bit further north than that, and it's slight risk from there all the way south through South Florida and including the Keys. And indeed, we said there'd be a 5% tornado risk at least, and they have a 5% tornado risk in that entire uh, slight zone area. If you're south of the center, Joe, um, you're going to get less. I mean, you're going to get gusty winds. You're going to get bands of rain that go and go through, and when they go through, you might get a quick gust to 50 or 60 miles an hour, and then it'll just drop off. I know that's the experience I had when I was in Boynton Beach when Ian crossed, and that was further south. That came in at Fort Myers, and then went out, along the Central Florida coast. Uh, But I got to believe that there's going to be severe thunderstorms and tornadoes popping up with this
Oh, no
in
question.
that zone. No, I think there's going
No
to be
question.
especially if the pressure is as low as it is on this. I think you're going to see quite a few spin ups.
Yeah, there's no question about that. This is the classic. You get tornadic activity with landfalling hurricanes, and this is going to be one for the books. So it'd be amazing if during the 12 hours or so that it's going through the central part of the Florida Peninsula, that there weren't any reports of any kind of funnel cloud or tornadic activity. There's going to be quite a bit of convective activity associated with this particular. And that's the other thing too. I mean, we're talking about excessive rain totals, but you get underneath one of these possible thunderstorms generated by this hurricane, and you're not going to see torrential. You're going to see rain coming down maybe at the rate of 3 and 4 inches an hour at one point, not continuously, but it's. And this is what we're talking about. I mean, this is what this storm is all about. Is it's going to be bringing tremendous rainfall, excessive rainfall, potential for severe weather, damaging winds, storm surge. It's going to be one for the books. And for the second time this season, we're probably going to have a another retired name, Helene, and it looks like Milton is going to be joining Helene.
And
In
barrel
no question about that.
and barrel.
And Beryl, that's
Yeah,
right.
From June. The severe weather risk extends into Thursday for much of South Florida and the middle east coast of Florida southward down to the easternmost Keys. So that's while the storm, during the overnight and then pulling out during Thursday morning. WPC for rainfall, they've got a stripe here of that's, I believe, the 10 to 15 inches, running again the I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando northward. It's a narrow band, but it's there of 10 to 15 inches of rain, and there probably will be some locally higher amounts. It's a sharp cutoff to the north. If you go north of Jacksonville, you're looking at an inch or less. A little bit of rain into southeast Georgia, but not much. And of course, if you're in the western half of the panhandle, you're not going to see a thing out of this. Also, the rain tails off in southern Florida because of the fact that they'll be just too far south for this. So it's right in that zone. Almost looks I just sort of had an image of the way the colors shape up, and I'm looking at this, and it looks like a fire-breathing dragon coming in from the east. The colors coming in from the east and just sort of poking down across Florida into the Gulf of Mexico. It is you know, sometimes your eyes can play tricks on you. That's sort of that's sort of what it looks like to me. Not much rain in the Northeast the next 7 days. You go up into upstate New York, particularly in north central New York, 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half there, up to a half an inch maybe in parts of northern Maine and northern Vermont and New Hampshire, and about a quarter to occasionally a half an inch across the Great Lakes. The rest of the country is dry, bone dry, except for the west coast from just north of San Francisco all the way up. It's not a lot. It's mostly a quarter of an inch or less, but then it picks up a bit in extreme northwestern corner of Washington State, and of course, it always picks up when you get over into British Columbia. It's a very, very quiet pattern, and the only thing what stands out, at least for the weather in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states and the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes, is that we've got this cool air mass going on for the rest of this week. We'll probably warm up on Saturday. There's another cold front that's going to approach on Sunday, and you see it here with a low that moves from Minnesota across the northern lakes. So I'm thinking that Saturday and Sunday will probably warm up back into the 70s, but this is a significantly chilly air mass that's coming down for the first half of next week. And I think
Absolutely.
we're going to probably see a lot of areas get their first frosts and maybe even their first freezes out of this.
Yeah, I told Renata last night, I said, I think that Monday night and especially Tuesday night, maybe not necessarily for where I am in Putnam County, because we may just fall short of that, but I would not be surprised if Albany, which forecasts for Sullivan County, Ulster County, Dutchess County, and points north, they're going to be issuing some kind of a, well, not necessarily a frost. I think it's going to be a bit too windy for a frost advisory, maybe on Monday night, but by Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, a big high building in over and unseasonably chilly air. Yeah, that could be the first real cool down, freeze down, if you will, of the upcoming fall and winter season. Joe, if you switch over to my page, I'm sharing right now the
Okay.
national the WPC. This is the day 3 12-hour probability of precipitation forecast. It was issued earlier today. It's centered on 0Z Saturday, October 12th. In other words, it's centered for the 12-hour period centered on 8 p.m. Friday night. And I can ask a question: does it get any drier from coast to coast? The probability of precip virtually everywhere is either 0 or 1%. The only places where it's higher than that is in the upper peninsula of Michigan, where they are calling for as much as a 31 to 40, 41, 31 to 41% chance probability of precipitation. And right along the immediate east coast of Florida, the trailing edge or the remnants of what will be Milton, 24 to 29% probability of precip. But everywhere else on this map, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2. It's there's a couple of five. There's a 5 in North Dakota, a 4 in Montana. There's a 10 near the California Oregon coastline. That everywhere seemingly dry as a bone. And this is even for those who are going to get doused with tremendous rains in the next day or so. By the time we get to Friday night, all of that pretty well will be gone down in Florida too. Amazing.
Ken Musillo, thank you for hitting super chat tonight. And thank you, by the way, 146 likes so far. We like that. If you like the show, hit the like button. We haven't done 200 likes in a while, so if we could get to 200, that would be a marvelous thing. The Hurricane Hunter is now making a third pass. It's not quite there yet. It just came onto the edge of the graph here. You could see the blue. So when it's flying on the periphery is where you see the blue line going down to under 60 knots and 40 knots. And then now it jumped up to over 120 knots. The pressure looks like the red line, it's like right on the edge. So I don't know if there's more, okay, to this as far as the pressure is concerned. It just posted now. So I just gave it, this was as of 19 minutes after 8 o'clock. So I think these usually run about 7 to 10 minutes behind. And we've got the graphic view, so you can take a look at the graphic view. So actually, Joe, the first fix they had was 9:04. This next fix was 9:10. So we may have hit a bottom here in terms of intensity. Just a guess. It likes to fluctuate, so we'll see. We'll see after a few more fixes if this is the beginning. If this was another strengthening trend that's ended, and now we're going to start to see the pressure slowly rise going forward. Not guaranteed, but we'll see what the plane does, what the plane shows. And I don't have the new hurricane model tracking guidance is probably not going to be out for another half an hour, so we won't have that. And I'm just kind of scanning the chat board here to see if there's any other questions. Uh, and I'm not seeing any other questions. Everybody's been, I love the conversation. I really do. That goes on while we're on. Everybody's all talking hurricane stats and little Mets baseball in there too, which is okay. So I kind of think that we've covered it all. Is there anything else? By the way, let me just look at the radar right now just to see what's going on in Florida. So we do actually have some rain from Tampa on the north side to just north of Orlando. So the I-4 corridor is that red line that you see. That's I-4. So it's raining south of I-4 and some rain down the coast to about Fort Myers. And you can see a cluster of heavier rain offshore and a few special marine warnings off the Keys. Also, some heavy downpours off the the middle east coast of Florida. In upstate New York, there's actually been some heavy downpours in parts of north central New York. You can see on the radar there's a little cluster there. Might even be a thunderstorm in there that is moved off of Lake Ontario and is now west of I-80, sorry, east of I-81 and moving eastward. Also, some scattered showers in southern and southwestern New York. Nothing up and down the coast. In the southwest, we've got some scattered areas of showers. And by the way, Maggie P, thanks for mentioning that. Those were not fog advisories that on the map that you see in Colorado and Wyoming. Those are actually air quality alerts due to wildfires that are going on. But we do have some scattered showers in New Mexico and Arizona, Utah, Colorado, into Nevada. Nothing exceptionally heavy, and a little bit of activity going on in the Pacific Northwest. But vast majority of the country, as you pointed out, the next week to 10 days, there ain't going to be much rain going on anywhere. And pretty soon, probably going to be starting to see maybe we get toward the latter part of the month, in places like the plains and in the Rockies, we should start to see maybe the first accumulating snows.
Could very well be, but I'm sure that a lot of people over the next week or 10 days are going to be enjoying the spell of tranquility that is going to be across the country. And the only real changes, as you pointed out, Joe, will be the noticeable dip in the temperatures during the course of next week as that surge of air from Canada drops into the central and eastern part of the country and brings chillier than normal conditions for a while.
Uh, by the way, just to touch on this, I will use the Western Atlantic map, and you'll find this interesting. The models have continued to show, and we've been talking about the fact that there is, and I'll put the map on the screen. uh, this gyre that's been sort of spinning away in Central America and spitting out disturbances that made Helene, that made Milton. It keeps trying to show another one starting out sometime during the middle part of next week in the Western Caribbean. You see it there. It's just kind of drifting around Wednesday, and Thursday, and then it suddenly starts a northwest motion into the Yucatan and it intensifies into another hurricane. And on this run, and we've seen this all over the place, and will continue to see this all over the place. This run turns it northward and brings it into New Orleans, and that's out, you know, 12 or 13 days from now. But uh, rather than focus on whatever the model does specifically, at least inside that 7 day time frame, Joe, we are seeing, more, this gyre in Central America just continues to spit out these disturbances, and there's nothing that says we can't get another one to form maybe later next week.
Well, we'll see.
I mean, I may be burned at the stake for saying that, but I'm just pointing out that the pattern, uh, patterns like to repeat. The pattern means something that happens over and over again. I mean, this seems to be the place where they want to generate this season. So who's to say that we couldn't get another one to spin up later next week? Let's hope
Well,
not.
we've
Let's.
seen, if for nothing else, we have seen in this particular year, this hurricane season, which started out rather slowly. We did not see the most damaging storms hit when many people usually expect them to hit in August and September. They waited until October, and who's to say October's not done yet? There may very well be another major storm, tropical cyclone in our future, but let's not dwell upon it. Let's take them one at a time. I mean, the one that we've been talking about hasn't even arrived yet in Florida, and that'll be the big story and probably our big discussion for tomorrow night when we reconvene here at 7:35.
That is correct, and that is our cue now to say goodnight. Thanks everybody for being here. Those of you who are new to the channel, we hope you like what you see. Hit the subscribe button so this way you don't miss us. Again, we're on Sunday through Thursday at 7:35 p.m. And that's not to say that weather doesn't happen on a Friday and Saturday, but we do like to have a couple of days to ourselves. But if there ever is a storm around on a Friday or a Saturday night, you could rest assured that we will let you know ahead of time that we will be adding additional shows for those two particular nights. So, on that note, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody on the chat board because all the regulars are here every night, and you know, we love it. We love them. They're great. So we'll see you all tomorrow night at 7:35. Right, Joe?
We'll be here.
All right. Night night.